Prioritizing sleep and building muscle are probably the two biggest indicators of longevity. I always say, what you're doing in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s is really setting you up for your decades to come.
Did you know there's an often forgotten muscle that plays a role in healthy aging? Well, today, physical therapist Chris Boettcher reveals what it is, why it matters, and how best to work it as he shares his brilliant tips for keeping fit and strong for life. Chris is also an athlete who's completed no less than 10 Ironmans in 10 years. Together with his brother, who's also a physical therapist, they deliver fitness and nutritional coaching, helping clients build daily habits that support health and longevity. And you're going to hear some of them today. If you're new to the channel, I'm Clare Johnston, a journalist on a mission to help you and I age well, look and feel better for longer. I do that here on YouTube, on my podcast platforms, and on my website, honest.scot. Scroll down to the bottom of any page on my site and you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter, rounding up all my latest content so you don't miss a thing. But now let's hear from Chris as he reveals the practical tips and insights to help us live well for longer. Chris, thank you so much for joining me from South Carolina.
Good morning, Claire. I guess afternoon for you, but I appreciate the invite and really excited to be here this morning.
I really appreciate the content that you share on social media, which is why I was so keen for my audience to benefit from it as well. And I'd love to hear how and why you began sharing health and fitness content, starting really with what led you to become a doctor of physical therapy in the first place, and also someone who competes in Ironman competitions. How has that evolved to come together?
Biggest thing for me was I was always very heavily involved in sports, 3 younger brothers, highly competitive. So it just kind of evolved from how can I continue to stay involved with health, knowing I was never going to be a professional athlete or anything like that. And that kind of opened the door to injury prevention and working with athletes. And that's what drew me into physical therapy. And then, as I got into my career, kind of what really shifted my perspective was my youngest brother, who his name is Brett, and him and I were both PTs at the time. And in the middle of the pandemic, we just got very frustrated with the direction of healthcare. And we were sort of just spinning our wheels, not really feeling like we were able to help people the way we wanted to. A lot of just red tape and things that we were having to jump through. And we sort of took a step back and realized that, we had built a system for ourselves in our own lives that allowed us to build sustainable health in a very simple and efficient way. And there was just a lot of people struggling to figure out how to do that and address those root causes. So we kind of put our heads together and started actually a small podcast a couple of years ago that turned into where we are now. And, Brother to Brother was kind of formed from that. And as a result, we started, putting out content and actually distanced ourselves from our traditional physical therapy jobs. And so now, we make a living coaching and running a community that just helps people simplify health and sort of filter through the noise that a lot of our kind of traditional mainstream narrative has created around just overcomplicating health.
That absolutely is it, isn't it? When you think of all the different theories around diet and supplements and all the kind of emerging new theories as well, what is the most simple message that you're passing on to clients?
Yeah, it really comes down to, there's not a one size fits all approach. As you said, like there's a lot of things telling you not to do something. And unfortunately, that leads to a lot of just analysis or paralysis by analysis kind of thing.
Yes.
And so we try to really simplify it, take a look at each individual, figure out, what does your lifestyle look like? Where are you having your biggest challenges? And we talk about things like putting meals on autopilot. I don't think any of us, as busy as our lifestyles are, should have to make 21 decisions on meals every week. And so if we can take, for instance, like breakfast and lunch, those are meals that we tend to kind of go through the motions with because we're very busy. And then, maybe dinner's a little bit more structured, but you tend to get to that mid-afternoon and it can turn into a feeding frenzy very quickly because of the decisions you made early in the day. So trying to simplify nutrition early in the day and then looking at what is a sustainable pattern for exercise and, obviously encouraging more steps, but there's been a big shift even in my own life on the resistance training side. I was doing a ton of cardio for years and years while I was competing, and now, my bread and butter is strength training. And I think every individual, whether they're 20 or 80, should be doing at least a couple of sessions of strength training. And if it's organized in a productive way, you only need to be in the gym for 45 minutes to really get some quality benefits from that. And then it's just about consistency after that. So, if you can build that system that you start to see that momentum, and you talked about, kind of the chaos of life a little bit earlier too, where, if we can kind of filter through all of that other stuff, focus on stress management, take care of our sleep, nail those basics. And, in a few months, you can be in a completely different place with your overall health.
I wanted to home in on some brilliant advice that you shared in a post, which you introduced by saying that you'd completed 10 Ironmans, treated over 3,000 patients over the past 10 years. And then you said, here's every fitness tip I could think of, which I just absolutely loved. Now, there were 50 tips on that list, so we can't explore every single one, but we are going to take a look at some of the tips that kind of stood out to me, really, especially for my kind of age category, that kind of midlife and up. First of all, you said you think it's important that we establish a full range of motion before we start building strength. Why and how?
Yeah, so there's a kind of multifaceted question there, but in general, if you're strengthening through a full range of motion, you're building stability and you're also encouraging flexibility. So most people don't realize that, you wake up in the morning and your hamstrings are tight, your low back is tight, that if you are utilizing strength training effectively, you can actually build flexibility by working through that full range of motion, because you're putting your muscles on a full stretch while you're also handling some force and some stability through the joint. So that encourages your muscles to be able to maintain that length, which is why if we can really focus on range of motion and proper technique with strength training, that can be one of the best things for your overall flexibility and just decreasing stiffness and joint pain and things like that. And on the inverse of that, you see people all the time in the gym who, if they're doing a squat or they're doing some kind of overhead press, and they're only going through maybe a third to half of the range of motion, what you're really doing is creating a lot of, you might be strong through that specific range of motion, but you're limiting your body's ability to figure out how to go through the full range of motion. So you can actually be at higher risk of injury and put yourself in a position where, as you're getting stronger in one range, you're getting weaker and more unstable in other ranges of motion. So then as you get into more functional movements, like, you bend down to pick up your kids off the floor, and if you've only been going through half the range of motion, all of a sudden now you've got a back problem or a hip problem, knee problem. There's a whole host of injuries that can come up as a result of just, not focusing on that full range of motion.
And what does a full range of motion look like? Because I think I looked at that tip and thought, oh, that means that before you start strength building, you've got to make sure that you can move in every direction, or you've got some kind of flexibility in every direction. How do people do that?
Yeah, so something as simple as, let's say you have knee pain, and when you go down to try to get into a squat, you're not able to get down to 90 degrees. Maybe the distance it would be to get down to a normal chair, okay, which is generally where it's recommended to kind of take your squat to. So in that case, if you can't get down to 90 degrees, it doesn't make sense for you to be picking up weight and trying to do, hold a 20-pound dumbbell and do squats when you're only going down halfway, that kind of a thing. So you'd be better off building slowly and increasing that range of motion as the quads, as the glutes get stronger and support that knee a little bit better. Now, all of a sudden, you can start to come down, an extra 5 degrees, an extra 10 degrees, and you're working closer and closer to that full range of motion. And then at that point, now you can go ahead and start adding in a few pounds of weight and resistance. And same thing with I mentioned, like an overhead press. If you have some light dumbbells and you're trying to push more and more weight and sort of ego lift, but you have a previous shoulder injury that's limiting you and restricting you from going through that full range of motion, that's probably just setting you up for another injury long term. So really focusing on some of those stabilizing muscles, those very simple movements that maybe aren't quite as glamorous, but are going to do a great job of setting us up for success long term.
Okay, so making sure that you can do those squats before you start adding in the weights, and that you can do those stretches before you're raising your arm to lift a weight, for instance, just that simple.
Yes, exactly. Just making sure you're focusing on that full range of motion. And again, there's different ways to be able to do that gradually with things like bands. It doesn't always have to be, machines and dumbbells and things like that, to be able to gradually progress strength in a very safe way.
Another one that interested me, train your diaphragm. Now, we used to hear a lot of this in my school choir days, that we were to sing from our diaphragm. But why do you think the diaphragm is the most underrated and underutilized muscle that we have? That's what you said. How do we train it, and why is it so important?
Sure. And I think it really speaks to our general day-to-day activities as to why this has become so overlooked. All of our sitting that we do kind of puts the low back and puts the diaphragm in sort of a compressed position. So it makes it hard for us to encourage taking deep breaths and things like that. But also, as we get more stressed, as we get more anxious, I'm going to kind of visualize this a little bit and kind of overcompensate, but we tend to kind of like use these muscles up here to breathe. And those are supposed to be more accessory muscles, or think about like secondary muscles. If you're running, out for a run and you're working really hard, they help to support the lungs and the breathing. They shouldn't be the primary driver, but the more our posture it's impacted by sitting and stress and things like that, the more these become kind of the primary source of breathing. And as a result, our diaphragm gets weaker, and it creates more irritation in the neck, irritation in the shoulders, low back problems, things like that. So there's some musculoskeletal issues that can be created from it. And that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg, because, if our diaphragm is firing effectively, it has a huge impact on increasing blood flow really systemically throughout the body. It allows us to decrease stress. Even, you kind of, if you ever just like take a pause for a minute and check your pulse, okay? And then slow yourself down and just take 10 slow, deep breaths, really focusing on what I would call like belly breathing. And you can see that heart rate just plummet. And that's a good sign of just stimulating what we call the vagus nerve, which is kind of helping to calm the body and decrease stress, things like that. So there's just a profound number of benefits of getting our diaphragm more active. And again, some very simple, like tangible things that I like to focus on is just, first of all, just disconnecting and thinking about your breath. So this could be as simple as laying on the floor, which is a really good place to start, because the more movement we incorporate, if you haven't trained your diaphragm for a while, it can be very hard to be doing other things and thinking about taking that deep belly breathing. So, the goal would be to kind of relaxing the chest, relaxing the shoulders and the neck, and focusing on that belly breathing. So you want that belly button coming out, big, long, deep breath, and then exhaling back out. It can work very well.
I'm doing it as you say.
Yeah, and you can do some different techniques with it. It can be as simple as, a 5 to 7 count inhale and hold for a couple seconds, and then a slow 5 to 7 count exhale. Or other people will use things like box breathing, where it's like 4 seconds breathing in, 4-second hold, 4-second exhale, 4-second pause. And you can kind of play around with some different techniques, and there's a million different ones out there. Even some that can prepare you for sleep. If you struggle to fall asleep at night, some basic breathing techniques that really help calm the nervous system and prepare the body for sleep.
It makes so much sense, and yet it is the first thing that goes. When I so often take a kind of stop myself in the day and realize I'm almost panting, like just taking these short breaths. And do I then take the time? I might slow my breathing down for like a second, and then I'm just back to normal again. So, how long should we be taking the time out to correct our breathing for? Is this a sort of 5-10 minute thing? A couple of minutes at a time? Should we be doing it multiple times a day? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think early on, especially if you deal with back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, and
All
you're
of
you're
it.
also very stressful, then it's something I would probably focus on more frequently, because the more frequently you're doing it, the more it's kind of muscle memory in a way. You're training the nervous system and the diaphragm to be able to fire properly. So doing it once a day for 5 minutes and then not doing it again till the next day can be somewhat effective, but I would argue you'd be better off doing it for maybe it's just 1 or 2 minutes and you're doing that several times throughout the day. And that could be even breaks in your work schedule. You kind of have an hour, you work hour and a half, and then you pause for just a few minutes to kind of work through that.
I'm thinking now, set a few alarms on the phone
Mhm.
and just do it every couple of hours through the working day. I'm going to do that after this call because it's something that really resonates with me. I've got a lot of shoulder, neck tension, lower back pain, and don't focus on my breathing at all. And just to make clear to people, when we talk about breathing from the diaphragm, it is taking that breath not from up here, but so that your stomach is actually rising and falling as you breathe. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
That's
you
where
you
we
want
should
to
be
keep
feeling the.
your upper chest should stay very calm, and the vast majority of the movement should be at the belly. So again, that's why if you can start laying on your back, it's going to be very easy for you to feel that as the belly rises and falls. And then probably my favorite option is kind of double dipping with steps. So disconnecting. I try to leave my AirPods and things like that behind and getting outside for some movement and just breathing, because you're getting some sun in your face. It's obviously great for mental health all on its own, but if you can combine that with breathing and not thinking about anything else except for your breath and walking, I think it's a great way to just calm the nervous system and also have some intentionality around our breathing.
Fantastic. Great advice already. I want to move on to the next one because we've got a few to get through. You say a focused 45-minute workout is more productive than a 2-hour workout with no structure. Now that's music to my ears because after about half an hour, I'm bored, I have to tell you. What does the ideal focus workout look like, and why is it better than 2 hours of just general exercise?
Sure. So again, first of all, think about exercise. It is a stress on the body. Okay. So doing endless kind of unstructured amounts of it is not necessarily something that's productive. So the goal should be to get an effective stimulus on the muscle to improve metabolic health, or if you're doing some cardio, to improve obviously cardiovascular health. But we want to try to avoid just kind of mindlessly exercising, because there's a difference to me between exercising and training. And the reality is you may not be trying to compete on the football field or whatever it is, but if you're training, you're going to get way more benefit from that structured exercise than you are just going in there with no plan. And we kind of see that all the time of, taking an individual they're very active and they're working out 5, 6, 7 days a week, but they can't make any progress because there's no structure. They're not building any muscle. And as a result, we kind of take those individuals, and if we can give them 2, 3, maybe 4 days a week of structured resistance training, all of a sudden they start to see progress. And some of the basic things that we focus on is, for instance, taking rest breaks between sets, and allows you to actually push your muscle to more of like true failure with each set, versus just kind of you're in the gym and you're jumping from this machine to this machine to this machine, and there's never really any intention around it. So creating that intention around the exercise, and then with the proper rest breaks, if you're we usually recommend at least 90 seconds. So, something as simple as like 2 sets on one machine where you're pushing yourself pretty hard with each set, and then resting, and then coming back and doing a second set, and then resting before you move on to your next exercise, can make a ton of difference between getting the right stimulus on the muscle to be able to actually lead to strength and metabolic health gains. So that would be, kind of the first piece of it. And then also just understanding that there's diminishing returns on a lot of volume of exercise. So I'll go back to the example of, you're doing a machine lift, and if you do 2 quality sets, you're going to get a ton of benefit from that. But during those couple of sets, we're slightly tearing down the muscle, which is important because then our body sees the need to repair that muscle. And ideally compensate above where we started that day. So then the next time we come in there, we're a little bit stronger and we're kind of ready to be able to tackle that next workout and continue to build. However, if we're doing 4, 5, 6 sets of the same exercise, all of that is just extra volume, extra tear down of the muscle. So now instead of our body being ready and fully recovered above baseline, 48 hours later, it might take us 72, 96 hours to be able to fully recover. So we've got all that extra soreness, all that extra damage. And then, we're trying to come back in the gym a day or two later, and our body's not even close to ready to be able to recover and to do another workout. So it's just adding more and more stress to the system, and you're working hard, you're sore, you're sweating a lot, but you're not seeing any progress because there's just no intentionality built around that.
And when you talk about tearing down the muscle, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so anytime we're doing any kind of, whether it's running or resistance training, there's micro damage going on at the cellular level of the muscle, okay? And that's actually good. That's a positive sign because that's a stimulus that is signaling to our body that we need to repair. And so you get some slight inflammation, which again, inflammation has kind of been, kind of pinned as a negative thing, but for the body, short term, it can be a very positive thing. That acute inflammation tells our body we need to repair and we need to recover. And we're going to do some things here to hopefully be able to recover above where we were left off so we can handle that same stimulus that we're asked the next time. But again, if we have too much of that inflammation, too much irritation on the muscle, then it just takes our body just too much time to be able to recover in between.
You say weight train for your metabolism and do cardio for your mental health. Can you explain those different impacts?
I guess I'll start on the cardio side. I mean, I love cardio. I think it's fantastic for us, but I definitely try to discourage people from focusing on how many calories are you burning, how much are you sweating. Those aren't necessarily great markers of a quality workout. So being able to use cardio for mental and cardiovascular health, you're increasing perfusion, you're doing some things to increase your VO2 max and things like that are just, they're setting you up for longevity. There's no doubt about it. However, if I'm trying to just improve my overall metabolism and put myself in a better spot, muscle is the most metabolically active tissue that we have. And it also is a blood sugar sponge. So if I can be building 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds of muscle over the course of a few months, that's going to be the recipe for success long term to continue to, if your goals are to lose weight, to be able to lose weight, but also be able to maintain that weight. Because if we're dropping muscle while we're losing fat, then that's why people yo-yo. They drop 20, 30, 40 pounds and they're pumped, but then a couple months later they start putting it back on again because they've really crushed their metabolism in the process. And that's why cardio is just not an effective way long term to be able to maintain weight loss. Versus if we can be adding some muscle mass, we're going to be stabilizing blood sugar much better, which that's really a key. That's something we focus a ton on. Is the goal should be stabilizing blood sugar throughout the day. And if we're building muscle at the same time that we're doing that, then again, you're going to be in a great spot metabolically to continue to get healthier.
I mean, I guess this is why I think, firstly, it is very little understood, the impact that muscle can have on our overall health. But it's also, I guess, why you now see a few prominent doctors saying muscle is the organ of longevity, can even protect brain health. It's root to branch benefits. When it comes to your line of work, that's obviously bread and butter is building muscle. But how important do you see it in terms of longevity?
Yeah, I don't think there's other. I mean, you could argue prioritizing sleep and building muscle are probably the two biggest indicators of longevity. Again, VO2 max is another one that would probably be right up there. But what kind of working on my end of things, when I see, people who are getting in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the loss of muscle mass is what leads to declining mobility and declining mobility is what ends up killing people. You think about, you go into the hospital because of pneumonia. Well, you got pneumonia because you couldn't get out of bed, because you no longer had the strength to be able to get yourself up or get out of the chair, things like that. So, and even fall risk. I mean, you fall and you break a hip. It's a large percentage of people that are unfortunately going to perish within a year of a hip fracture. So all of those things are put in place because of diminishing muscle mass. So, again, whether I always say, what you're doing in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s is really setting you up for your decades to come. And the research shows that, like, you're never too old to start building strength and building muscle. It can certainly get harder as we get to be 60, 70, 80 years old, but it can still be done. So that's why I try to really encourage everyone, no matter what their baseline experience is with weight training. And sometimes that can get a little bit overwhelming for people, that they feel uncomfortable going into the gym. And so that's where just simplifying movements and understanding that something as simple as, doing sit to stands from the chair can be a strength exercise, and can really do a lot to build that foundation for people.
Well, it's good that you say that, Chris, because my mum and dad live next door, and I have invested in a barbell rack of multiple different weights, and they are going to start lifting with me, gentle to begin with, because I don't know where we'll end up. But I do want to show people as much as possible. And I want this for my mum and dad. I've said to them, look, it may go against everything you ever thought, because you thought you should be winding down in your 80s, but I need you to wind up and start strength training, because otherwise, you could have a fall, and exactly the things you talk about. So that's what we're going to be doing, Chris. And who knows? I hope it will be inspiring for the people watching it. But
I love it.
That is what we're talking about.
I can't wait to hear how that goes. And yeah, I give them a ton of credit too for their willingness to jump into it, because I'm sure it is out of their comfort zone a little bit, but I think they're going to find that, just a couple days a week of consistency, and it gets some really profound results.
Yeah, well, we have an awful laugh between us, because they can't sit for a moment without me either dropping a red light cap on their heads while they're trying to watch television at night. They're on supplements. I have my dad microneedling growth factors into his scalp. I mean, you name it. But they are so up for it, and they just want to have the best quality of life for as long as possible that they can, because they enjoy life and they want more of it. So we're the dream team, really, when it comes to trying out different anti-aging approaches, but this one's going to definitely be our biggest one yet. So watch the space on that one. I wanted to ask you as well, you talked about walking for longevity. I love walking. I have a dog, so that's something I do daily. But why did you say walk for longevity? Because we've just talked about muscle strength. Would that not have the advantage there for longevity?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Muscle mass is certainly right up there. But again, the research definitely shows that, as society becomes more and more sedentary, you've probably heard sitting is the new smoking. I mean, it's kind of become a coined phrase out there. And it's true, because there is really no upper boundary of where steps stop helping us. So, if you're walking, 8 to 10,000 steps a day, great. That's a really good starting point. But certainly, if you're getting 10 to 12, it's a little bit better. 12 to 14, a little bit better. There's no place where those steps stop helping us from a longevity perspective. And, the beauty of it is it's helping us on so many other levels. I talked earlier about the stress management, and again, getting sunlight in our face, and our circadian rhythms, and all those different things that have an impact on sleep and recovery. And because it's such a low impact movement, humans we're designed to be very efficient walkers. We're probably some of the most efficient, movers in terms of, a species. And so we're designed to move, and we're designed to be doing it often. And we sort of have created this culture that's not the case. And so I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the changes that we are, is people are realizing that, if I don't get moving, this is just as bad as me smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So just trying to find some simple ways, you're even seeing some things like walking pads that people can put underneath their desks, and Some, I always encourage people to try to take walking calls and try to get outside and move when you can and get active with your kids and just trying to find simple ways to incorporate movement because really that's what we were designed for.
And you advocate walking after meals, which I've seen some research around for managing blood sugar levels. I mean, is that the primary benefit there as you see it?
Definitely. Yeah. So again, if you can, I think it's as much as like in some cases, like 30 or 40% reduction in blood sugar spikes after meals by just moving for, 10 or 15 minutes afterwards. So it doesn't need to be, an hour long walk. It could be just something as simple as, yeah, taking a stroll around the block for a few minutes, before you go back to work in the middle of your day after lunch. But those little things keep blood sugar more stable. And again, we talk a lot about insulin resistance and just trying to overcome that because if we can keep the demands on insulin down, then again, that has such a cascade effect in terms of cardiovascular health and kidney health and blood pressure. And one of those areas that, in my opinion, is probably the most overlooked in health is just keeping blood sugar more stable throughout the day and some very simple things that we can do to make that happen.
I 100% agree. I think along with muscle strength, that's probably the least understood thing. Although we're hearing more and more about managing our blood sugar levels now, I think it's beginning to filter through. But certainly that has had a big impact on me. And we know that obviously when people go on to develop diabetes too, that has enormous impacts on the entire body. So we don't want to get to that stage if we can possibly avoid it.
For sure. Yeah. And again, on the insulin resistance side of things, it's like most people don't even realize they have it. Unfortunately, I don't know how it is over in the UK, but here they don't really even check a fasting insulin score. So, they're like, oh, your blood sugar's fine. Your blood sugar's fine. And all of a sudden, bam, you're told you have prediabetes. And that insulin number has been creeping up for years and years and years, but you just hadn't hit that kind of inflection point where the body can't keep up anymore. So it's one of those areas that, we try to educate, pretty strongly on because it's just, again, I think it's very misunderstood and not discussed nearly enough in the general health world right now.
Running now, you say it's not bad for your knees. My knees told me something different. What are we doing wrong when this happens? Because I remember at a very young age, I'm talking maybe early 20s when I decided I was going to take up running and ended up having to go and see my doctor because my knees were so sore. Does that come down to footwear? I mean, what are we doing wrong when we get sore knees when we're running?
Yeah, so I think, there's a few different factors with that. Footwear definitely plays into it some. We could spend an hour talking about this all on its own in terms of, how I think modern footwear is not really setting us up for success with the way we're positioning our feet and restricting movement in our feet. So we have, our feet are designed to grip things and to be very strong, to be that kind of platform to build movement off of. And very early on, we kind of cast them, so to speak. We kind of put them in a very tight shoe, make the foot and the ankle muscles very weak as a result. And that has, pretty profound effects up the chain. But on top of that too, you think about things like we talked about strength training, which, for anyone who comes to me saying, hey, I want to lose some weight and I want to get back to running. The first thing we're going to do is, clean up the diet. And then we're going to start talking about strength training because we need to be able to build that base foundation of movement. You take somebody who's not very active and they try to get into running and you're putting roughly 4 to 5 times the force of your body weight through your joints when you run. So if you don't have that base strength to be able to handle that, then yeah, your knees are going to hurt, your hip, your low back is going to hurt, and you probably are going to get some kind of an overuse injury very quickly. So establishing that early baseline strength and then, slowly having some kind of a quality progression. So again, I'm going to double down on what I said in my post. I don't think the running itself is the problem. It's that we've put ourselves in a position where our body is just out of balance to be able to handle the demands of it. So if we can kind of find some ways to create some more stability of the core, of the hips, and strengthen the feet and things like that. And then I really like getting into more of like a walk run. Like if you are really interested in getting back to it, we probably shouldn't just go out and try to run 2 miles right away. It might be something as simple as jogging for a minute, walking for 4 or 5 minutes, and then slowly kind of narrowing the gap on that until eventually, you're able to string together 2, 3, 4 minutes of consistent running without having to take a break. And that allows, again, the physical recovery of walking to go along with some of those more challenging components that running presents.
I think I'm halfway there because we have a puppy, and that puppy takes me on a speed walk every day. He is just dragging me on the walk, and we go very fast. So hopefully I'm halfway there. Maybe I'll break into a jog next time and just give him what he's looking for.
They don't take no for an answer, that's for sure.
Well, they keep you fit. I mean, this is the beauty of having a dog. You have to go out and walk every day, even in a Scottish winter, which is what we're in at the moment. So I can highly recommend dogs to anybody looking to keep their fitness up. I wanted to ask about hydration as well, because you said something really interesting, which is that hydration starts the day before exercise, not the morning of. So could you explain that one for us?
So you think about it as like when we drink something, our body is not going to immediately bring it in on a cellular level. So it's going to take some time to process in the gut and for our body to be able to actually make use of it, to be able to rehydrate our cells. And that's where, again, focusing on the day or even 2 days before becomes much more important. I think of hydration almost as like it's a constant focus. Like it should be something we're doing every day, having a little bit of a game plan. It could be something as simple as, having a 20 ounce, water electrolyte mix next to you at your office, and trying to get that first one down before lunch, refilling it, and then trying to get another one down before you finish up your workday, so you can have some of that kind of baseline hydration that's happening every day. And especially with going into, for instance, those people that are going to be working out in the morning, when we wake up, we're actually quite dehydrated because we haven't drank anything for several hours, and from all the breathing that we're doing, we're losing fluid. So I'm a big fan of a little bit of electrolytes, some water to kind of kick things off in the morning as a bit of a reset, and then from there, kind of building that into your day-to-day routine to try to get some fluids in. And then last thing I'll say with that is our body also does a much better job of hydrating slowly throughout the day, as opposed to like maybe you're drinking, let's just say 70 ounces in a day, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. But the vast majority of it is all done in a very short period of time. You're pounding, 40 ounces of water over the first couple of hours of your day, and then you're drinking very sparingly after that. So when you overwhelm your kidneys with a lot of fluid very quickly, it's obviously going to process that out, and you're not necessarily going to be putting it to the best use. Versus if you're kind of breaking that up throughout the day, you're just going to be able to maintain more of that baseline.
Interesting that you mentioned electrolytes, because I see a lot now from the doctors that I follow on social media. A lot of them are talking about salt, and salt not being the enemy, and consume more salt, which, I mean, to a child of the 80s, 90s, we're like, what? We were all on the low sodium salt. And you mentioned electrolytes. What should we be looking to do with our salt intake? And when we're looking at electrolytes, I look at some of these mixtures online and they've all got sweeteners through them, and I'm thinking, well, do I want to be taking sweeteners in the morning? I mean, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think in general, you're exactly right. Salt gets blamed for what insulin resistance creates. So when our kidneys are functioning properly, it can handle removing excess salt when it's needed. But however, when we have all of that high levels of insulin because of those blood sugar demands, what that ends up doing is making it more difficult on our body to process salt, and it causes some retention of that salt, which drives up blood pressure, which is where we've kind of lost our direction with this. Is like, if we're handling insulin resistance, then salt isn't our problem. But unfortunately, we ignore insulin resistance, and then we point the finger at salt intake as the primary driver for things like blood pressure problems and cardiovascular risk. So I agree with you 100 with those people, and kind of what you said earlier, that like, I don't think salt is an issue, but I do think having, the kind of the key early on is if we can remove a lot of those processed foods, we're going to decrease a lot of the crazy excessive amounts of salt that were in those foods. Okay, because again, that's kind of what they use for a lot of the preservation of those foods to
Yeah.
be able to sit on shelves for as long as what they do. So, what we see with a lot of our clients is that when they get onto more of like whole foods approach, all of a sudden they actually need to start adding salt to their meals. You're thinking about, if you're having a steak or chicken or something like that, is those were things that before they were like, I'm not adding any salt. I'm being told not to add any. And they start to need it because they start to feel like they're kind of a little bit low energy. And that's kind of a common symptom of it as well, is when your electrolyte balance kind of gets out of whack or runs low, you start to feel kind of sluggish, even sometimes even a little dizzy with workout, stuff like that. So that's when we really want to focus on sometimes increasing salt intake, and not just salt, but also things like magnesium and potassium. So I try to find a quality electrolyte if I'm going to supplement that has a good balance of both of those in there as well. Because again, if you're just taking in salt, which that's a great example of like Gatorade, for instance, is it's almost exclusively salt. The potassium and magnesium that are in there are pretty minute. There's not a lot there. And so it turns into basically sugar and salt. And that's, unless you're very, very active, and you're in competition and sweating for hours a day, those types of things are not necessarily an electrolyte that I would look to go to, but trying to find something that is a bit more balanced. And then the last thing I'll mention kind of related to the sweeteners is, for me personally, I see that as a bit of a kind of majoring in the minors. And we really try our best with Simplifying Health to focus on pulling the biggest levers that we can. And I think artificial sweeteners, and I'll kind of use an example of like a Diet Coke. Okay, if I have somebody who is having one Diet Coke a day, but it's kind of giving him a little bit of that cheap dopamine, he's enjoying it, and he's no longer drinking 3 or 4 Coca-Colas a day, that's a win. That's a major step in the right direction with blood sugar control. And the same thing with, you see some of these like protein bars or electrolytes, is like, if there's a little bit of sweetener, again, I think there's a lot of other things we could be worrying about. And maybe when we have everything else dialed in and we start talking about optimizing health, that's a time when, okay, if you want to be optimal, yeah, we probably can cut artificial sweeteners out. But 99% of us don't live in a world where optimal is even realistic to even attempt. So we just want to feel better. And if a few artificial sweeteners allow us to do that and have more energy, then to me, that's a trade-off I'm willing to make, and most people are as well.
That sounds like a nice pragmatic view, because I do feel when you hear people arguing, I listen to all these health podcasts and so on, and when people start banging the drum about these things, you do think we're missing the major problem here in the first place, which is, just the whole basis of a lot of people's diets, so exactly. When it comes to fine tuning, maybe we could worry about that then. But first of all, let's get back to just trying to, eat from scratch if we can, and then take it from there. A high protein diet isn't just for bodybuilders. If you're breathing, it's for you. I love that tip from you. How much protein do you recommend and why?
Yeah, so kind of think about, protein is your builders. That's what we're building, not just muscle, but things like hormones and being able to repair tissue day to day. And so we're very good at getting in our energy sources, carbs, fats, things like that. We're not very good at getting in our protein intake. So in terms of like a number, research kind of shows whatever kind of your current body weight is, and typically we unless you're more than 50 pounds overweight, I would use more of your current body weight, is roughly 0.72 times whatever your body weight is in grams of protein a day is a really good target as kind of a minimal target. Okay. So kind of use the example of, if you're 200 pounds, that would be right around 144 grams as your target for the day. So, and there's certainly benefits of going above that. But I would kind of use that as sort of your minimum target. And for some people that is overwhelming to think about, because you may be at 40, 50, 60 grams a day. And in that case, we really encourage people to bridge the gap, thinking about, how do I get to 30 grams per meal? And if I'm doing 30 grams per meal, now all of a sudden I'm at 100 a day. And it gets a lot easier to be able to work up to more of those long-term numbers. But that's really where it comes down to. Like you said, it's not just for bodybuilders. It's the key to a stabilized blood sugar. You're gonna have way more satiety from the higher protein diet, and it's going to digest slower. So that's where that blood sugar control comes in. We're not getting those massive blood sugar spikes and crashes that tend to lead to more cravings, more stress, more of those kind of empty calories in the middle of the day when you're trying to just kind of get off the bottom as that blood sugar spikes, for that quick energy pick me up. That again, it could be as simple as 3, 4, 500 calories that get added into your day that you wouldn't need if you just focused on a bit more protein throughout the day. And that's, that could add up to a pound, pound and a half, or even more per week of extra calories, because we're not having that intentionality around protein.
Yeah, again, makes a whole lot of sense. And I mean, with each topic, there's a whole expanded conversation we could have, but there are a few more points that I want to get through, and I'm aware of our time. I was very interested in the statement that you made that rarely is the area of pain the source of your problem. So you're saying most pain is referred pain.
Yeah, and again, you can't necessarily paint with a wide brush here, but again, going back to your example of knee pain with running, I would be very surprised if that was the source of the issue. Again, whether it's weakness in the foot, something as simple as, for instance, if years ago you sprained an ankle and you lost some range of motion in your ankle, that can potentially cause knee pain, later on, because the knee is compensating for some of those limitations. Hip weakness, core weakness. So that's where, being able to look at things from a little bit wider lens and see how you're moving functionally, how your balance is, how you're walking, all those different things allows us to kind of tease through what's actually the problem here, and why is that leading to some irritation in this area. So and it could even be on the opposite side of the body. We see all the time where one leg is stronger, but it's where the pain is, because you've been compensating for years for some weakness on the other side. And I always say that the body is an extreme adapter. So like if there's a problem, it's going to figure out how to continue to move to be able to get the job done, but it doesn't necessarily set us up for long-term success as it's continuing to create those compensations, year after year.
Linked to that, and one that very much applies to me, I have to say, you said that your back hurts because your glutes are weak and you sit too much. Now, I'm in my 50s now. I guess a lot of people listening to this who have been office workers, in my case, as a journalist, my career just sitting at a computer, typing all day. Low back pain is a real issue. I mean, you can almost I sometimes feel like I can feel the compression in my back. So you recommend walking hourly and doing some simple glute squeezes throughout the day to help with that. How do we do the squeezes, and how big an impact can that make on the glutes with regular exercises like these?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to that, like sitting in general for the pelvis and the low back puts us in kind of a mechanical disadvantage. So think about your glutes are designed to kind of help support the low back. And when we sit a lot, they become pretty weak, and they're put in a position where they're just not going to fire very well. So, some things like getting up and walking. I mean, you could do something as simple as standing at your desk and just literally squeezing your cheeks together. If you're working from home, it's a lot easier to like get on the floor and do things like bridges where, your feet are bent and you're just trying to pick your hips up, focusing on squeezing your bottom with that. And that can be really helpful to kind of offset some of those things. Again, there's some other tools. I'm a big fan of incline walking, because when we're walking on an incline, it's very low impact, but it does a great job of engaging that posterior chain. So think about everything from your low back down your backside. So, your butt muscles, your hamstring, your calves, all of that is being really worked pretty significantly when we're walking uphill. So it's also helping from a posture standpoint too. So if you sit a lot and you can do some incline walking, there's a bit of a kind of a tug of war that's able to go on there to kind of try to help keep you in balance. So it's one of those things where like we don't need to be, doing something at all hours of the day to try to offset sitting, but it just continues to come back to a little bit of intentionality given our current lifestyle goes a long way to prevent things from kind of spiraling out of control. So yeah, again, my goal is, we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff here today that like, my goal is not to overwhelm people with, you got to do this, 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 and this, because it's like you start getting this laundry list of things and it just becomes insurmountable. And it really just starts with one or two small things and then allowing that to kind of snowball from there, as energy levels improve and as those small habits become more of your lifestyle. So yeah, on the low back side of things, I think it comes down to just we need to move more. So if we move more and we can have a few minutes of intentionality throughout the day, then we're going to be put in a pretty good spot.
And when we do our glute squeezes, should we just be pulling the whole pelvic floor up with it? I mean, is that we might as well do it all in a oneer? Because again, for people in my stage of life, these are the sort of things, women going through menopause like me, these are the sort of things we have to really focus on, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
And I would actually argue, when I was working in the clinic, one of the things that kind of our first step with like core activation was actually what you just talked about there, kind of engaging we call it the pelvic tilt, kind of pulling the belly button to the spine, kind of drawing in at the pelvis. And you might not even lift your hips at all to start off with. So that could be like the first phase of the movement. And then once you kind of nail that, then you can go ahead and start engaging more of that bridge and being able to kind of draw in, hold tight, squeeze up, squeeze your bottom, hold for a few seconds, and then control back down. So that's a kind of a nice progression to things, if you wanted to kind of put all those different pieces together. So yeah, I love the pelvic tilt, the idea of kind of engaging those deep core muscles, because the reality is that's actually what stabilizes the spine. It's not really your six-pack muscles. Your six-pack muscles are more artificial. And again, there's nothing wrong with training those things, but they're not really doing a great job of actually stabilizing the low back at a deep level.
Do you think we can get rid of back pain in later life?
Yeah, again, it's obviously some level of nuance to it, depending upon your history and levels of arthritis and things like that. But there's no doubt that movement and strength and just consistent stability of the core and the hips can do a lot to minimize low back pain. And again, blood flow is a big part of that too. You think about how much, if we sit a lot, that stiffness, that pain is going to get a lot worse. And similar to the breathing techniques that we were talking about earlier, is if we can move more, we can breathe better, we can create more strength, we can do a lot to, even if you've had years and years of back pain, to at least make some significant headway in that department.
You talk about giving yourself a margin to enjoy a day, but never missing twice. So do you think we should be exercising pretty much every day?
I think we should be moving every day. I guess my bias would be, anywhere from like 2 to 4 strength sessions a week is kind of what I typically recommend. And then, if you can get in a couple of, cardio sessions, or maybe your cardio is walking. I mean, I think we kind of overlook how beneficial just low level movement can be for our overall cardiovascular endurance. And so, if you don't have time to be able to do like, he's telling us to do 2 or 3 strength sessions and 2 cardio sessions, but I only have time for like 3 workouts a week, but you enjoy walking with your family, or, taking a walk with your wife after work, those kinds of things, that can be your cardio right now. And maybe that allows you to eventually bridge the gap. But we need to get started and just not. I was definitely guilty of this growing up. Was seeing the mall walkers and thinking that's not really exercise. And now I'm kind of falling into that category of, walking to me is probably one of the best forms of exercise, and it's something that all of us can do and should be doing in some capacity every day from a recovery standpoint. So,
and actually, I don't view walking as a chore. Walking is fun and therapeutic for me. What is not fun is lifting weights. And that was going to take me to the last point where you say, sustainable fitness shouldn't feel like a burden. I mean, that is the goal, because we need to keep it up. But how do we keep it fun?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, you're definitely not alone. There are plenty of people out there that they just don't enjoy strength training, which is why I think having a very efficient plan is so important. Because if it's something that, if I hate weight training and I have to drive to the gym and I have to, deal with too many people there and I can't get on the equipment I want and I've got to drive home, I'm probably not going to show up very often, to be honest with you. Versus if it's something I can do in my basement, in my garage, and all I have to do is walk out there. I know what routine I'm going to do, and I can get it done in 30, 35, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm much more likely to do it than I am if I have to go someplace. So figuring out what are the major hurdles, the obstacles to overcome to get you to do some of the things from a health perspective that you don't enjoy doing, and then trying to figure out how can I test myself to see if I'm making progress. Maybe that's something as simple like around here, one of the big things, even for people 50, 60, 70, is like pickleball, which is kind of a small version of tennis if you're not familiar with it. And it's, getting active, it's social, it's you're moving. And so having something like that on your schedule every week that you enjoy doing that's active, I think can be really encouraging and motivating to do some of the things that maybe you don't enjoy quite as much that are a part of your balanced approach. And I even talk about things like putting a date on the calendar, so to speak, where maybe you are going to do some kind of small competition, or you're going to go take a long hike with the family, and it's going to be 6, 7, 8 miles, and you feel like I can't do that right now, so I'm going to spend the next couple of months trying to prepare my body for that. And that way you kind of have something out there. It could even be something more like aesthetic, where it's I'm going on a beach vacation here in 2 months and I want to drop some weight. I want to get healthy. Like having that out there as a bit of a target for yourself, I think can be very motivating to be able to get some of those things done. So I'm not sure that directly answers your question, but I think kind of having that combo of things you enjoy, a target, and the things you don't enjoy, just creating some efficiency of it. So it's not something that you feel like you have to be doing for hours and hours every single week.
Yes. Well, I think that's key. If it feels manageable to you, and if you know yourself, know that you're not going to drive across town to do that gym session, but you are likely to pick up a few weights in your basement, go for that option and keep it manageable to you. I listen to a podcast as I work out. That helps. But the other thing that keeps me motivated, which is worth stating, having started this really in my 50s, is to get stronger in later life. There's nothing quite like that, because it does feel like aging backwards. So to realize that you could lift something that you couldn't have lifted, you could lift things with ease. I have a grandchild who's coming up to 4 years old, and I can still lift her around, no problem. And every time I do it, I just feel like it's a real boon. It's a real bonus, because it's why you keep strong in the first place. It gives you that quality of life, and there's something about it that kind of supercharges you to keep going, even when you don't enjoy standing there doing the weighted squats and all the rest of it. When I think of that, I can keep going.
I love that. Yeah. And that's living right there. And there's no better why than being able to stay active with kids and grandkids. And that's really what inspires us every day. So I think, keeping focus on that is critical. And I'm so pumped to hear that. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a really special thing, and people will be surprised, I think, if you're starting this from scratch and you get into a routine and you keep going with the weights. You do start to see and feel the changes within weeks, and then that kind of propels you on to keep going. So it's definitely worth making the start. Chris, thank you so much. I could have just, like I said, I could have talked through every point in more detail. And you're just an absolute encyclopedia of information there. So thank you so much. I hope you'll come back sometime and we can sort of focus on more kind kind of specialist areas, get into some topics in more depth. But that was fantastic. Thank you.
I'd love to. This was a great conversation. And once again, I appreciate the invite and happy to come back anytime.
Great. Oh, so pleased to hear that. Thank you. Some brilliant tips and insights from Chris there that have already made an impact on me, particularly the realization that some of the headaches I've been getting are probably referred pain from the top of my spine, just from the poor posture that I keep as I'm sitting working. So that's something that I'm going to have to take a look at. And I mentioned at the start of the video that I first spotted Chris through his brilliant post listing his top 50 fitness tips, which I'm going to link to below, along with his website, so you can check out more from him. Also in the description below, you're going to find links to my website, social pages, and podcast options for listening to the Honest channel on the go. And if you enjoyed this interview, don't forget to hit subscribe along with the notification bell, or if you're listening on a podcast platform, then hit follow so you can keep up with my latest episodes with leading experts across the fields of health, fitness, cosmetic medicine, and skincare, as well as some hugely inspiring individuals who share how they have turned their health around. Let me know in the comments what you learned from Chris today, and if there are any tips in particular that you're going to be taking away from this episode. But for now, thank you for being here today.